I'd seen her before, always in passing, by the row of mailboxes or bringing in her groceries late in the evening. She lived 2 doors down, the kind of house that looked like it remembered more voices than it currently held. I knew her name was Anna, though we'd never actually exchanged it. Someone had mentioned it once at the neighborhood barbecue, and it stuck in my mind like a song lyric I didn't want to lose. That morning, I was standing in line at the cafe, trying to look less out of place than I felt. 23 years old, and already in a habit of eating alone. I came here more out of ritual than hunger. Same coffee, same corner seat. A place where the barista knew me just enough to nod, but not enough to ask how my day was. She walked in just as I was waiting for my order. I noticed the way the room shifted, or maybe just the way I did. She wasn't trying to stand out. Jeans, hair pulled back, a coat she probably wore every winter, but something about her presence made me straighten unconsciously. When she got to the counter, the barista greeted her like an old friend. The usual Anna? I felt myself flicking my eyes down to the napkin in my hand, folding it, unfolding it. Her voice was warm but tired in a way that made me want to listen closer. The usual, she said, then glanced around the room like she already knew where she'd sit. Her eyes brushed past mine. Nothing dramatic, just a second longer than they needed to. Enough that I felt caught, though I hadn't done anything. I picked up my drink and sat in my usual spot by the window. She chose the table across from mine, close enough that if I shifted in my chair, our reflections lined up in the glass. It would have ended there, me sipping coffee, pretending to scroll my phone, but she noticed the way my cup wobbled as I set it down. "Hot?" she asked, a faint smile pulling at her mouth. I wasn't sure she meant the coffee. Yeah. Always too hot at first. She laughed softly, just enough sound to cut through the cafe hum. It wasn't a laugh at me exactly, more like she recognized something familiar in the clumsiness. We didn't speak again for a while. She read a paperback, tapping her thumb against the spine, while I stared too long at the same paragraph on my phone. I kept wondering if I should say something else, ask what she was reading, or if she always ordered the same thing too. Instead, I sat with the quiet. When she got up to leave, she passed by my table. I thought she would walk right past, but she stopped, slipping her book into her bag. "You live nearby, don't you?" It wasn't really a question. 2 doors down, I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. She gave a small nod, like she was filing that away. "I thought so. You should check on me sometime, just in case I've disappeared." Before I could answer, she was already walking toward the door. The bell above it chimed, and she was gone, leaving behind the faint smell of her coffee and the line of her words, sharper than they should have been. I stared at the napkin in my hand, folded into a crooked square. For a long moment, I didn't move. Then I noticed my phone buzzing on the table. One new message. From an unknown number. "Start with tomorrow." I told myself not to answer, that the text could have been a mistake, a wrong number. But by the next evening, I was standing on her porch with my hands shoved too deep in my jacket pockets, trying to look like I had a reason to be there. She opened the door before I knocked. "You're early," she said, and stepped back to let me in. Her living room felt lived in but unfinished, like she'd stopped caring halfway through making it hers. Books stacked on the floor, a half-burned candle on the coffee table, a mug abandoned beside it. A woman's house, but without the noise of a family. "I was just making tea," she said, moving toward the kitchen. "You drink tea?" "Sometimes." I trailed after her, unsure if I should sit or hover. She set 2 mismatched mugs on the counter, filling them carefully, almost ceremonially. I noticed how her hands didn't rush. Everything she did seemed measured, like she was keeping time only she could hear. "You're in school, right?" she asked, sliding a mug toward me. "Finished last year. Just working now." She tilted her head, waiting. "Warehouse," I added. "Stacking boxes. Nothing glamorous." Her smile was small, but her eyes softened. "Work's still work. I used to waitress. Best tips I ever got." Something in the way she said used to made me want to ask what she did now, or what she had given up to be here, in this too quiet house. Instead, I sipped the tea, burning my tongue again. She caught the wince. Still too hot. I laughed under my breath. Guess I don't learn. For a while, we didn't talk. The silence wasn't heavy. It just sat between us, waiting. I noticed the sound of the clock ticking, her nails tapping the mug, the way her gaze flicked to the window every so often, like she was making sure the world hadn't noticed us. Finally, she said, almost to herself, "My son used to drink from that mug. Every morning before school. He left it here when he moved out." I blinked, looking down at the chipped ceramic in my hands. I didn't know what to say. "He's your age," she added, then met my eyes as if testing how much that detail would matter to me. The air shifted. Suddenly the room felt smaller, and I wondered if she regretted letting me in, or if I should. I thought about leaving, inventing an excuse. But instead I stayed, gripping the mug too tightly, and she didn't ask me to go. When I finally stood to set it down, she brushed past me in the narrow kitchen. Not intentional. At least, it could have been an accident. But her hand skimmed my arm as she reached for the kettle. I froze. The touch was nothing, just a passing graze. But it meant too much. She didn't acknowledge it, just asked lightly, "More tea?" I shook my head. My voice wouldn't have worked if I'd tried. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The second time I came over, it wasn't planned. I'd been walking back from the store, arms full of groceries, when I saw her bent over in the driveway, tugging at a stubborn bag of mulch. "Here," I said before I could stop myself. "Let me." She looked up, hair falling into her face, and for a second she just studied me, like she was deciding whether to let me. Then she stepped aside. "Be my guest." I lifted the bag, heavier than I'd expected, and carried it to the side of her porch. She smiled faintly, brushing dirt from her palms. "Thanks. You always appear at the right time, don't you?" It wasn't true, but I let the words sit there. Inside, she poured me water without asking, and we ended up sitting at the kitchen table, groceries still in my arms. I didn't mind the wait. I minded leaving. We talked about small things, how long she'd lived here, the weather turning colder. She mentioned her divorce without dwelling on it. Just one line. It was quieter after that. I didn't ask questions. I wanted to, but the silence around her words felt like a boundary. At one point, I said something dumb about the coffee at the cafe being overpriced, and she laughed. Not loud, just a soft ripple that made the whole kitchen feel less lonely. I caught myself staring at the curve of her smile, and when her eyes flicked up, I looked away too fast. That was when the knock came. Her neighbor, the older man from across the street, poked his head in after she opened the door. "Hey, Anna, just checking on you. Saw you with the mulch earlier." She thanked him, chatted lightly, while I stood in the background holding my bag of groceries like proof that I belonged. But his eyes slid over me, curious. Too curious. When he finally left, she shut the door and leaned against it for a moment, her expression unreadable. He means well. Always watching. Something in her tone made me think she didn't like being seen. Except, maybe by me. I wanted to say that out loud, but the word stuck. Instead, I set my groceries down. She noticed the carton of milk and smiled. Whole milk. Brave. Her hand brushed mine as she pushed the bag toward me, and this time neither of us pulled back right away. Just the lightest touch, lingering. I could have leaned closer. God, I wanted to. Her lips were parted just slightly, her breath shallow. But she moved first, retreating toward the counter. "You should go before your milk spoils." I nodded, throat dry. Picked up the bag, too heavy now with everything I hadn't said. At the door, I looked back once. She was still standing there, arms crossed, but her eyes softened when they met mine, like she was holding something back too. We almost said it then. Almost. It was late afternoon when I saw her walking back from the market. Paper bag tucked against her chest, scarf wound loose at her neck. I caught up without meaning to, my steps falling in with hers. "You following me now?" she said, glancing sideways, but her smile was there, faint. "Only on Thursdays," I muttered, and she laughed, quiet, low. We carried her groceries together. No rush, just the sound of leaves crunching under our shoes. At the bench near the corner, she stopped. Mind if we sit a minute? We did. The bag rested between us, apples rolling against each other with a dull knock. For a while, neither of us spoke. The street was empty, but it felt crowded with what we weren't saying. Finally, she asked, "Don't you ever get tired of being looked at?" I frowned. By who? Everyone. Women your age. Friends. People who expect you to be something you're not yet. Her voice carried a sharpness I hadn't heard before. Like she wasn't asking me at all. "I don't really notice," I said. Then, softer, "Except when it's you." She turned to me. Really turned, her eyes holding mine long enough that I almost flinched. "You shouldn't say things like that." But it's true. Her hands twisted in her scarf, nodding and unnodding. I could feel the air shift, her body leaning closer before pulling back again. "You don't understand," she said, almost a whisper. "If anyone saw us," she trailed off, shaking her head. "You're too young. And you're not just anything." I cut in, my voice sharper than I meant, but it was out before I could reel it back. She blinked, startled, then looked down at her hands. I thought I'd ruined it. But then she said, so quietly I almost missed it, "Sometimes I forget how old I am when you're around." The world felt still then, like we were suspended. I wanted to tell her everything. How I replayed our silences, how her voice stayed with me long after she was gone, how I woke wondering if she was thinking of me too. But all I managed was, "I don't want this to stop." Her breath caught. She turned, the scarf slipping slightly, exposing the curve of her collarbone. The space between us narrowed, only the bag of groceries keeping us from closing it completely. I saw her lips part, her hand twitch like she might reach for mine. Then she looked away, sharply, as if the moment itself had been dangerous. "We should get these apples home," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she lifted the bag. We stood, walking in silence, our shoulders brushing once, just once. At her door, she hesitated, keys in hand, eyes flicking up to me. I thought she'd say something, an invitation, a warning. Instead, she just looked, long enough for a question to settle between us. Unasked, unanswered. The next few days, I didn't see her. Not on the porch, not at the cafe, not even walking back from the market. Her absence felt louder than her presence ever did. I told myself not to notice, but I did. I checked the cafe at odd hours, lingered near her street when I didn't need to. Nothing. Finally, one evening, her lights were on. I stood outside, groceries in my hands, rehearsing a reason to knock. Something simple, borrow sugar, ask about the weather, anything. But before I could lift my hand, the door opened. A man stepped out. Older. Not old. Closer to her age. He carried himself like someone who'd been inside before, not like a visitor. He said something over his shoulder, and she laughed. A small, easy laugh. Not the one she used with me. I froze, groceries cutting into my palms. He left, and she stayed in the doorway, hugging her arms against the night air. For a second, her eyes swept the street and landed on me. Her smile faltered, just slightly. I raised my hand, halfway between a wave and nothing at all. She hesitated, then lifted her own hand before closing the door softly, like shutting away a secret. The days after that blurred. I stopped going to the cafe, skipped walking the long way home. My phone buzzed with her name once, then stopped. I didn't answer. I couldn't. At work, I caught myself stacking boxes too quickly, hands shaking from something I couldn't name. I imagined her explaining that man. A friend. A mistake. An ex. I imagined her not explaining at all. Every version hurt differently. One night, I typed out a message. "Do you want me to stop coming by?" My thumb hovered over send, but I never pressed it. I deleted the words, wrote them again, deleted them again. The screen glowed with my hesitation. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. On the third evening, I passed the cafe and saw her sitting alone at my usual spot by the window. A book open, a mug cooling beside her. She wasn't reading, just staring out like she was waiting for someone. I almost went in. Almost. My hand was on the door, my reflection overlapping hers in the glass. For a heartbeat, it looked like we were sitting together again. But then she glanced down at her phone, her expression softening into something I couldn't read. Maybe she was waiting for him. Maybe for me. I let the door close without opening it. Walked away with the sound of the bell I didn't ring echoing in my head. That night, I dreamed of sitting across from her again. Only this time the seat stayed empty. It happened on a Tuesday night. I wasn't planning to see her, but the power went out on the block. The street was dark, the houses dim silhouettes. I noticed the faint glow of a candle in her front window, and before I thought it through, I was knocking. She opened the door, holding the candle low, shadows moving across her face. "Figures it'd be you," she said, voice soft but not unkind. I shrugged, trying to play it casual. Couldn't stay in the dark. She let me in. The house smelled faintly of melted wax and tea. Candles scattered across the living room cast uneven light, everything flickering like it couldn't decide to stay or go. We sat at the kitchen table. No mugs this time, no buffer. Just us and the sound of silence outside. She didn't look at me right away. Her hands folded on the table, fingers tightening and loosening. "Finally," she said, "you saw him." I swallowed. "Yeah. He's not. It's complicated." She paused, then shook her head. "He's nothing. Just someone who remembers me from before." I wanted to believe her. I think I did. But what stuck was the word before. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. Her laugh was bitter, not amused. "Tell you what exactly? That I'm 46 and don't know what I'm doing? That I keep telling myself this shouldn't matter, but here you are anyway?" The words landed heavy, but they weren't cruel. They were raw, like something she'd carried too long. I stared at my hands, the way the candlelight shook over them. "I don't care how old you are. You should." Her voice cracked just slightly. "I should." Silence stretched. I could hear the faint tick of the cooling oven, the wind brushing the windows. Everything waiting for one of us to move. I finally looked at her, really looked. The tiredness in her eyes, but also something else, like she was fighting not to lean across the table. "I don't want to be a mistake," I said. My voice was low but steady. Her eyes met mine, sharp, then soft. "You're not." The words weren't dressed up. They didn't need to be. They just sat there, fragile, real. I reached out, slow enough to pull back if she flinched. My hand found hers on the table, our fingers awkward at first, then fitting in a way that felt inevitable. She didn't move away. She squeezed once, just once, and let out a breath like she'd been holding it all night. The candle flickered between us, shadows leaning closer. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. She looked at me, a small, tired smile tugging at her mouth. Okay, that was it. Just that. But it was enough to feel like something had shifted, even if the rest of the world hadn't. Winter slipped into spring before I realized how much had changed. Not all at once, just in small, ordinary ways. I still went to the cafe in the mornings, but now, sometimes, she was already there. Same table, same mug cooling too quickly, her book never really being read. We didn't sit together every time. Some mornings we only exchanged a glance, a faint smile. Other mornings she'd slide my coffee across the table before I even ordered. It wasn't romance in the way people talk about it. It was steadier, quieter. We walked together sometimes, back from the store, or just around the block after dinner. Once, we ended up on the same bench where we'd nearly said too much. This time, she leaned against me without hesitation. No words, no questions. Just the weight of her shoulder against mine, both of us watching the streetlights flicker on. She still kept her house half unfinished. Books in stacks, candles in odd places. But now there was always a second mug drying on the counter. My mug. Once, she told me she hadn't laughed at the cafe in years before I stumbled into her silence. She said it without looking at me, as if the truth was easier that way. I didn't answer, just reached for her hand under the table, where no one else could see. It wasn't perfect. She worried about what people thought, neighbors, her son, the man from before. I worried about losing whatever this was by wanting too much of it. But the fears softened over time, replaced by the simple fact that neither of us left. One evening, the power went out again. Just our block this time. I brought over a thermos of tea, and she lit the same candles. We sat at her table like before, but there was no tension now, just warmth. She raised her mug, smiling faintly. Still too hot. I shook my head, grinning despite myself. Not this time. The clock ticked on the wall. 8:47. Exactly the same as the night I'd first walked into her kitchen. I noticed it, though I didn't say anything. She did too. Our eyes met, a quiet acknowledgement of how far we'd come without ever meaning to. Later, as we cleaned up, she brushed her hand against mine. Light, casual, but no longer hesitant. And I thought, maybe this was all love really was. Not grand gestures, not fireworks. Just two people staying. I don't know when the fear faded or when the pauses between us stopped feeling heavy. I only know that, now, when I sit across from her and she looks up from her book, I feel steady. Seen. Like life finally finished the sentence. What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?